Welcome everyone, and yes, thanks for coming along today. What a great turnout. We managed to fill just about every seat, which is great. So far, a really good attendance ratio for our second NFT meetup of the year. I'm just going to give a quick intro and whilst Riff and Drew set up. And yeah, let's get going. This is also being live streamed at the moment on Twitch. And we'll post the link afterwards. So yeah, we finally got our act together after a year and a half and figured out how to do this live stream.
Without fancy equipment.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you just explain what Twitch is? Because I'm not a big Twitcher.
Straight off the bat, Danielle's already got a few questions.
Yes.
Twitch is an app for gamers where they stream themselves playing games in a nutshell. And you can stream for up to 48 hours, I think. And then you can save it and then post it to YouTube. Sorry, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Alright, so in terms of today, I'm going to give our usual intro to what is ATB. I'm going to talk about Artlink, which is my project and what we're doing in the NFT space. And then I'll let Rafe and Drew take it away with all things generative art. I'm going to touch on PFPs and whether they are or aren't generative, what aspects are generative. We'll then go into some image processing basics around languages and tools to create and code generative art, as well as the origins of generative art and how to get started for beginners. So yeah, first up an intro for anyone who's new to ATB. We're called All Things Blockchain. We've been around since October 2020. Wow, time flies. Yeah, myself, Magnus, and Danielle started this community, which is a non-profit organization aimed to educate and spread the good word of blockchain in the community. We've got a few sponsors that are helping us make these events possible every fortnight now, almost. We've got Labris, SwiftX, Artlink, Binance, She's Blockchain Savvy, Digital Search, Silotax.
In the house tonight?
Yes,
Anyone
yes.
needs tax advice? They're here.
Tax and AlgoHub Australia. So yeah, big round of applause for our sponsors. Thank you very much. And on the note of AlgoHub, next month will be an AlgoHub NFT meetup. So the Algorand people are presenting specifically around the Algorand NFT ecosystem, which should be pretty interesting to see what's happening in another blockchain. And yeah, if you want to stay in touch with us across our socials and have a bit of a browse of our previous material, then feel free to grab that QR code. We'll post it at the end of the meetup again. Okay, so I'm just going to give a quick intro. So my name is Stefan Chetty. I'm the founder of a project called Artlink, and Artlink is a general purpose NFT licensing protocol. So far, NFTs have grown in popularity, but a lot of people are still struggling to grasp what it means by ownership of an NFT. You can use the JPEG as a profile pic, but what else can you do with it? So yeah, that's where Artlink comes in. So Artlink aims to unleash the potential of NFTs out into not only the physical world, but also in other mediums such as advertising, product placement, and even cartoons/movies. So in terms of our use cases, as I mentioned, we're targeting a few main use cases around enabling art galleries to rent/license NFTs for use in their galleries, making it easy whilst paying the owner of the NFT. Placing products in, as I mentioned, games, movies, or even cartoons, and stock imagery. so stock imagery is where creative agencies, advertising agencies can go to book NFT media for a fee, and the owner and or the creator, depending on the type of license, gets rewarded for it. We have an upcoming NFT drop called Reincarnate. So it's our first inaugural NFT collection that Artlink is bringing out. And but as the word says, we're breathing new life into some of your favorite NFTs using generative adversarial network technology. So we might go into that for a subsequent meetup. If you want to learn more about Reincarnate, just drop into our Discord. That's the QR code there. That's about all I have. I'm going to hand it over now to Rafe and Drew to introduce themselves and take it away.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Just a little bit of housekeeping. Don't ask any questions, or you'll just end up on the stage like me and Drew did last time. We asked some questions, and now here we are. So if you want to just keep a low profile, well, here we are. Right? We should just keep a low profile. So I read an interesting tweet the other day on Twitter about NFT collecting, which I think I haven't said the tweet yet. Yeah. It just kind of sums up the negative attitude a lot of people have. It just said that this guy wanted to find out about elderly NFT collectors. And he said that if anyone had any NFTs that were over 25, they should direct message him. So that's the tweet. I thought it was funny.
Did you direct message him?
No, because I'm only 24. So, but time's running out for me, so that's why I'm here. Okay. So. I'm a programmer, and I work for DLTx, so I have an interest in the programming side, and I have an interest in the art side. So generative art tends to attract people who overlap to some extent in that respect, like me and Drew. I studied photography years ago. I've always been interested in photography, and when I studied it, it was like stopping around trays of chemicals and optics, and that was how you learned photography. Halfway through the course, they said, no, that's all gone now. Digital cameras are the way to go. So, got my first digital camera in '96, and then nothing for years. A couple of years ago, this new NFT stuff comes out, and all of a sudden, digital art is very strongly associated with the sort of thing that I do for a living, and I've become interested again. And I want to know, before we go too far into it, like how many people here are more on the artistic side of the spectrum, and how many are more on the programming side? So, who's an artist here? Like, as in more of an artist than a programmer?
Yeah.
And who's more on the programming side?
And who does neither?
Most people. Okay, because I don't know what level to talk to people, and I don't want to bore them, I don't want to patronize them. So anyway, that's me. My name is Rafe. I work for DLTx.
Thanks. Thanks, Rafe. I was actually only going off the Reddit because I know he's a crowd pleaser. Shout out to the DLTx crew here. So my name's Drew. I'm a blockchain developer, I suppose, at DLTx, NFT lead. I call myself, but no one really knows what that means. I suppose because it's such a young industry, right? Board apes were kind of like released like a year ago, but we can kind of go into the history a bit later. So my interest is mostly in, I consider myself an artist before a developer. I'm not sure if that's just me being pretentious, but I definitely think creativity is my strong point, and sort of the logic and the programming is kind of the sort of secondary sort of thing that I'm kind of just trying to get by with. So I studied 3 years undergrad at QT. So if there's any visual artists here, I'm not sure if we crossed paths. But then did my masters in AI into machine learning. So I'll kind of go into sort of GANs and sort of generative networks or generative versal GANs a bit later on. It's actually kind of a strange sort of topic to sort of go by because there's a lot of contradictions and there's a lot of sort of, I don't know, like discrepancies there. So yeah, I found it very challenging to sort of actually come up with some ideas, but yeah, anyway, so that's me. Just sort of, I suppose you would say, you know, straddling that line between, you know, the intersection of culture and technology and trying to sort of find out what's new and innovative and interesting and yeah, how it can provide value. I don't know, was that a good soundbite? Right, well, I suppose we take it away. I have to, yeah, give a disclaimer. Stefan has sort of rearranged our slides a bit, so we're kind of just like winging this.
Hey Drew, what is generative art?
I have no idea.
Okay, well, does anyone know this? Oh, here we are.
So, yeah, I actually did put this prompt in so I could remember what generative art is. Generative art is
it was the least we could do.
Predetermined systems that often include an element of chance usually applied to computer-based art. So this is sort of important, I think, because it doesn't strictly sort of define or necessarily entail that it's sort of computer-based. It can be just anything that is generated, but usually it is just. Is that too pretentious to say? Okay, so yeah, leading into my next slide, I can sort of talk about the history of where the taxonomy of generative art, if you will. So it's sort of strongly based in, I suppose, if anyone has a history of art, like data, Fluxus, moving into sort of expressionism, abstract expressionism, and kind of action painting of, you know, like the abstract expressionists, I suppose. You can see there Jackson Pollock. But yeah, so this is sort of this idea of process art, where it's sort of referred to the process of making art. It's not hidden, but it remains a prominent aspect of the completed work. So that you can part of the whole subject. I should have cut that down. But yeah, so it kind of generative art can, or the history of it is sort of based around this idea of process art, based around the idea of it not just being sort of a static, fixed image, you know, is in the continuation and the sort of the
process of making.
The process of making, yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, yes, just come on.
If you go back to that, only because, did anyone else see that documentary with Jackson Pollock about the woman that found the art and they were trying to decipher whether it was actually a Jackson Pollock? Has anyone seen that documentary?
Jackson Pollock.
Sorry, Jackson Pollock. I'm not sure if anyone else has seen the documentary. But my question is for you with this whole NFT and where we're going, are we going to get to a point where we take like art, you know, from the traditional world and we can providence it like with NFTs?
That's actually a really good question. I don't think we're going to answer that, and I don't think anyone can answer that at this stage. So that's a rabbit hole that we can really go down.
I only thought of it because I watched
I
that
don't understand the
documentary.
question, by the way.
She wants to do physicables, like where you, I mean, there's.
Because there was a big controversy on whether it was actually a Jackson Pollock art or if it wasn't, and then there was like all these artists taking their little things that they look at to try to determine, because it's this generative art
So,
that he does to try
I
to see
think
if there was
what
a print.
you're discussing there is sort of like the kind of the dichotomy between sort of a commodity good and, you know, like provenance and just authenticity.
Can we say the word provenance?
I say
It's not
provenance.
Rhode Island.
Can I get away with my slides?
Provenance. Alright.
Sorry,
Feature this.
I wondered if that was a thing.
I actually wanted to do some prosing later on, but I don't think I'm going to go.
Anyway,
into-
moving on.
So this is like a great example of generative art. Like the very first examples, I think 1969. A Michael Knoll, I actually remember writing this in my thesis, 64, right? Anyway, so he was basically an engineer at Bell Labs sort of thing, and he did this on the IBM 790 sort of thing, you know, just that big old. So, you know, the roots and the history of these, this sort of mathematical kind of algorithm, it was kind of more a conceptual idea of the math behind it. And it was kind of like seen as like scientific plots of doing visualizations of data, sort of thing. So that kind of created an interest. And I think I remember the slide of one of the kind of the first, yeah, sure. Again, on the right there, that is that's another a Michael Knoll, the Mondrian. But at these early stages, it was kind of like oscillator art because you didn't have color screens, you didn't have, you know, personal computing, definitely didn't have NFTs. So there was kind of like these two kind of categories. I was actually going through the history and like trying to sort of look at the taxonomy and categorize it, but it's basically plotter art and sort of oscillator art on the early days. On that note, I just sort of came up randomly with the Rico project. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of it. It's sort of like this project where a lot of old retro computer art is sort of people have like looked at it. They obviously didn't have code. They kind of like reverse engineered it and sort of given the process of code. So I wanted to do like a circle back later on and kind of grab one of those examples and show you how to kind of like do a gen, but I think we're kind of dragging a bit now. So yeah, this is also kind of a bit dragging. Sorry, I wanted to kind of get into
Don't worry.
No, we'll
talk about it.
This is kind of this classification of general art based on sort of effective complexity. This is like Glenn Marvel's. But I wish this wasn't streaming. Glenn Marvel's definition of effective complexity. And it's basically sort of talk about how we kind of define complexity and also just effective complexity. And you can see sort of on the left there's like symmetry tiling, just basic geometric shapes, and this is just about repetition sort of thing. And sort of going up the scale, you get like more like fractal L systems and stuff, and then you get like the more complex sort of illusory genetic algorithms. And you know, if this was written a little later, you probably have, you know, neural nets and things like that. But then on the other side, it's just complete chaos. So I think that's a good analogy or just a good description of what generative art is. I'm not sure if I'm painting that picture right, but it's basically about, you know, complete repetition and just complete noise on the other side. So this is maybe a good place to hand over to Rev. I was going to talk about how this sort of relates to NFTs, how this relates to what's going on in the system at the moment. Obviously these two. Has anyone heard about art blocks?
Remember what?
Yeah, art blocks. Yeah. I know Ray wants to do a big spiel about this, so I don't want to hang too much on
Do you want to talk about all of this?
Well, here we go. So I thought that was a good segue to
Nice.
hand over to Ray. Okay.
Thanks, Drew. So, I guess there's a history of art aspect to this where we can look at famous paintings by the likes of Pete Mondrian. You know, does anyone know Pete Mondrian? You know the black and white grid with the red box painted in it. You know, he was a Dutch painter in the 30s, and it was very odd at the time because it was just very straight edge. You must know. No? Okay. Well then, what about Bridget Riley, the English artist? She showed it was, you could see some of her stuff in the Queensland Art Gallery last year. They're kind of wavy, symmetrical forms, right? No? So what about optical art by Victor Vasarely, where they just showed, the idea in the 60s and 70s was to amaze people by making computerized geometric pictures. That would just blow people's minds, right? And so you had a thing called optical art. And Bridget Riley is one of the leading exponents of that. She's still alive. Victor Vasarely, I saw it at a show of his in San Francisco years ago. And it was interesting at the time because there was no other way to do it. He had to paint those by hand. But the funny thing is that the more they did it by hand, the more regular they are. Now we can do it by computers, they're much wilder. So I guess what makes something generative? Right? We have a couple of different ways of talking about generative. The generative in generative art that we're interested in here often means it's done with an algorithm. It's not done by hand. Okay? That's one of the first things we'll say. If you're sitting down drawing a painting by hand, it's not really generative. The fact that you're using an algorithm means that you incorporate randomness. Stefan mentioned this last week. It generally has to be random. That's the whole point. There's no point. Oh,
so that's why the Jason guy who did this and it was just random. Is that where
Jackson.
Yeah. Jackson, whatever.
Can we get one of the main artists of the 22? Can we get his name correct? And a generative art meetup? Would that be? No, that's not true, Jackson. Because it's not famous. Yeah, blue poles, exactly. No. He got a bucket. He just slots it.
Just like that.
That's your generative art of the 60s. Also, he was alcoholic. Which we can't relate to. I don't understand his art at all. Especially Drew. Drew doesn't know what he's looking at. That guy was alcoholic.
I was waiting to see where you were going with it. Now I just had my aha moment. I was like, oh, it makes sense.
Good. So that's not generative, that's some dude slapping a bucket of paint on a canvas. Not generative, right? I could do it.
Well, it's random. You can't redo it twice.
It's not
gonna
random.
be the same.
It's him throwing the bucket. If he threw the bucket there, the picture would have stuff over there. He threw it here, so the picture is stuff over here. It's not random. Oh, we discussed this. We're
well,
gonna
let's have a
have
debate
how
here.
do we discuss this?
We'll leave that for the pub.
Okay, so it's process already. This slide is yellow, so it's my slide. No, I'm not finished. So, I guess one thing, thinking about all this during the week, it struck me is, if Jackson Pollock, or Jason Pollock, just trying to fit in.
He's turning in his grave right now, isn't he?
If Jason Pollock generated his stuff by some other means, no one would care, right? If Bridget Riley used a computer, no one would care. In fact, we'd say, well done, you saved yourself some time there. If Damien Hirst, do we know Damien Hirst?
Yep.
We know his currency project. It's all done by hand, not Damien's. It's like a bunch of other people just would be filling in those spots, right? So normally we don't care in the history of art. I don't think anyone cares how something is made. With true generative art, the how matters, it seems to me. It does matter how it's done, right? It's done with an algorithm. It's deliberately gives away a certain amount of artistic control into an algorithmic, stochastic method where they don't know what's going to come out. In fact, in the best of these projects, when you buy a piece, the artist is the first on Twitter to go, wow, that's really nice, I have no idea. They don't know what it's going to be like, okay? It's a completely, not completely, sorry, but it's random. So, you had abstract art which stood for nothing. Like I worked in a gallery for 9 years and I saw figurative art. That means it looks like something. It looked like the area I lived in. It looked like the mountains and the hills, right? It had to be, because it was a pretty area and people wanted something. We occasionally sold abstract art, but the figurative art paid for that, because most people are interested in figurative art. Abstract art means it doesn't look like anything. Op art means it's trying to trick you into thinking that it's something. It's a Trump lie, it hasn't really a thing, right? And that seems to me kind of corny now, because we can do that with computers, but at the time we couldn't do that with computers. It was a bit of a ride. So Victor Vasarely, Bridget Riley, she's still alive, she's still showing in the Gallery of Modern Art and QAG if you're interested. She's one of the main foundational figures of that. So, often these works are interactive insofar, and I'm not talking about the silly interactive, like press a button and make the art go left or right. They don't actually exist until someone buys them, right? That's kind of weird. In the old days, someone had to make a painting, and someone would buy it. I'm not sure if this isn't the first time where we've ever had the collector, you and I, determine the birth of the art. Because some of these things will just stop. If no one's buying them, they cut it off, burn the tokens. I know I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but I really think that this is a new kind of art. And you have to understand art history, or else you won't know that it's new, but you have to also understand the technology, or you won't agree with me. Usually people painted art. Okay, it's true that people sponsored artists and they would get them to paint something. Stuff that we consider now the greats of modern art, of traditional art, were often sponsored by someone, so they brought it into existence. But right now you can press a button, bring new art into existence. If you don't press a button, they burn the tokens and no more stuff. I'm trying to bring this back into NFT land, because this is NFT Wednesday, right? So, does anyone recognize that icon there? What is it? Chromie which? Yeah, Chromie Squid. So that was the first ever project in Artlink, which I keep coming back to. The artist who did this went to a gig in Coachella in the States, right? Saw a projection while he was dancing over some visual stuff and was very impressed and thought that was really good. And wanted to do something about it, wanted to get back, it triggered something in his head. He created this platform because he said that what was happening was digital artists traditionally, until the blockchain came along, would make pretty pictures with computers and then upload them somewhere, someone would buy them. There was no means by which you could nail down the provenance or the rights or anything like that. And they would print them off and sell them to somebody. And, or else they would, if you're like me, you just put them on Twitter and hope someone likes them and that's the end of that, right? And he said that wasn't good enough for artists. He wanted a platform where the provenance was important. So we talked about provenance before. Provenance just means who owns something. Can you prove that somebody owns something? It exists in the real art world as well. If you try to sell a real artwork, it matters who owned it before you and whether you can prove that or not. Okay? It's not good enough to just say that this is a nice picture. It really matters in the artwork. So what happened was that if you create pictures and put them on Twitter or Instagram, they're gone within a day. There's no way to preserve that history of what you've done. So he created a marketplace called Artlink with a different way of doing art. And if you're confused by any of this stuff, and I know that a lot of people are, the artists that he got in touch with didn't have a clue what he was talking about. It gave him nothing but like indifference, and they kind of laughed at him. So you're not alone. Like if you ever think like, I don't get this stuff, this is real people. He said all of the people he got in touch with didn't have a clue what he was talking about. And what he was talking about was generating art on the blockchain. Okay? So the big difference between digital art in the old-fashioned days, where someone would make a nice pretty picture, was, and what we call now generative art, is that the algorithm is totally in command. In the old days, you just got to see the best of somebody's work, right? You didn't get to see all the offshoots. You didn't get, so you look at a Bridget Riley or Victor Vasarely, you don't know how many times it took them to get that right. You're just looking at what they decided to show you. That's fine, that's generative art is. With generative art, and Artlink was almost the first to do this. The Autoglyphs was the first, but it's not considered really artistic, is it? It's more like a mathematical kind of... Yeah, okay, fair enough, I don't. And by the way, this Chromie Squiggle was a joke. He just said, here, it's like a hello world example. He said, here's what I'm talking about. Just use this example. And they said, no, that's cool, and how does it become iconic? Which I think is very interesting. And it shows you where people find value in stuff. He just said, no, 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 imagine there were just 24 points. You go down, you go up, you go down, you go up, and you just vary how much you go down, you go up by a random number each time. And there are some, like that's a plain one, right? But you get, there's about 4 or 5 types of fuzzies, there's slinkies, and so forth. But he said, no, 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 that's not art, obviously. That's just a silly picture. But imagine you real artists did that. But that's become the iconic, canonical example of art blocks art. And that's, at least to me, that's interesting because that tells us where we find value in these, because it's the original thing. Now am I done now, should I? Yeah, you All right, well, does anyone recognize this fine fellow? It's a big close to home for us. Okay, so that's
we need to
he was worried all week that we wouldn't have enough. Now he's like, come on, speed it up.
You're after this, Drew.
Yeah, alright.
So this is a profile pic collection that we had to do work, okay? And it is called Brick Tokens. This fine fellow here, I said we, Drew did it, okay? So this is an example of where you take a background image and you can generate 10,000 images, and there's nothing to do with art, nothing to do with anyone expressing themselves really. It's more like just, can I say that it's just money play, really. I made some money on it. I'm not complaining. We all did, actually. It was a good project. But the interesting thing about this is the connection between the NFT and the artwork. So does anybody know what the connection between an NFT and the artwork is? Like, what is an NFT? What has it got to do with a picture?
You can upload it to the blockchain and own it.
You can upload it to the blockchain and what?
And you can own it. It's your ownership. You can prove the provenance and who owns it.
Provenance? So you can...
It's like more like a clickroom ticket, isn't it? It gives you some... It's a piece of paper or a digital piece of paper that says this is what I own.
Exactly, but where does the actual picture come in?
Well, I think about it, it's the equivalent of having a key to a locker, and if you're lucky, your picture is still in the locker where you left it.
That's good. Cynical but good. Yeah, exactly. It's a key to a locker, and hopefully the owner of the locker hasn't swapped your stuff for something else. Yeah. So the key system doesn't know really anything about a locker. It has no idea what a locker is. Can you explain the connection between the blockchain and the picture?
In terms of the provenance hash, I actually did want to go over the provenance hash and actually give it a
just the metadata and the RTF system.
Oh, well, it's a complete scam. I mean, everyone knows that. So, it's talking about. No, I mean, there's two ways of having information on, an NFT. There's on-chain, and then there's like, well, I suppose there's three. There's on-chain, there's decentralized file storage, and then there's just sort of centralized. So for this particular project.
So when you say centralized, would other people call that off-chain?
Yeah. Yeah, but not off. I mean, on-chain actually means on the blockchain. IPFS is not actually on-chain.
What does that stand for?
Sorry, okay. So IPFS is Interplanetary File System, and that's, I thought it was a joke, but apparently they're actually,
But I
it's
thought
real.
that was the difference. All the Bored Apes were on IPFS, and that's all on the blockchain, and that's why they're so amazing.
Yeah, but so you will find more amazing things like nouns who are actually the data, image data is on-chain. So and also I was going to bring this up, but you will actually find generative works that have encoded SVGs on-chain. So it's an interesting, depending on how diehard the people are engaging with it. And to be honest, mostly I found that, especially working through some of these projects like Cryptopians, is that no one, it's the sort of the hardcore kind of people crypto heads who really care. and provide sort of a fallacy of like, like there's this erroneous kind of like ideology behind the project. But in the last 6 months or something, there's been too much sort of froth to care about that. So people have kind of wavered that idea of permanency and just like foreverness for just like a pretty picture. And it's an interesting kind of idea, but that's just sort of the market at the moment. But it is changing, we are in the middle. I don't know if you guys are like, anyone's holding an NFT or like looking to trade, but
Any elderly NFT
we
collectors?
have a bit of a bear market right now, right? So now is the time for innovation. Now is the time to stay true to the roots and get back to the actual the meaning of it rather than just pretty pictures. Was that it?
Yeah.
Did Luna have any NFT projects?
Yes.
Did they go down?
Did they?
Yes.
I kind of said that jokingly,
Lavana,
Of the chart.
they launched a whole bunch of them moved off random art and doing various things. There was a whole bunch of collections actually.
but there you go.
Every project on Terra is like just those
Well, I
things.
get that, but
It's hard to get away from Terra. I think you're talking about art and it still comes up. But I think it's a great point that Drew makes. What people don't understand, except for clever people who come along here tonight, all you have when you have an NFT is like a line item in a glorified database that's global. There is a provision in that to link to a metadata file, which is just a small little text file that says some stuff about the NFT that you just bought. And crucially, one of the properties of that text file is the image. Now, that image, that metadata file that's linked in the blockchain, that's where the first bridge out of the blockchain is made. Most files reside on a server somewhere, be it AWS or Google Cloud or something like that. And they belong to someone, and they can be changed. So when you buy, and for example, this picture here is just a file on a server, just a JPEG on a server, right? That the person who put it there presumably has the ability to change, okay? Now, in fairness to this particular project, they wanted it to be dynamic, and that's fine. NFTs have to be able to evolve a bit, and in fact they did. I had to take a screenshot because it blows up. It's all these Lego pieces, and the bits just all go everywhere. So that's a bit of fun. But they need to be able to change it because it happened a few months after people bought the original, right? But if you're going to spend a lot of money on an NFT that's associated with a picture, and the picture has rarity, which I think we mentioned earlier. You didn't? Did you?
I was going to go into it.
So, like the arrow through the head would be 10% of the pictures in that collection will have the arrow through the head. So people will go, oh cool, I've got an arrow through the head, I've got a rare Victorian. The beard, the hat, the grey background, right? So these all determine the market value of it because people will go after the rare ones. Strange, that's kind of the trend. But even the art box also does that, right? And they program in that rarity.
So when it comes to the generative art, who gets to decide the algorithm? So like, am I feeding it a whole bunch of pictures of what I want my art to look like?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we've done a couple of these, and we get photos and photos and photos of hats, arrows, pipes, glasses.
And then it goes and creates it for you.
Yes.
So you're using like an AI and...
No, it's deterministic. It's just they'll put a folder and they'll say rare, super rare, legendary, normal, and our job has been to program.
But if I'm an artist and I want the generative art to kind of have my look and my feel and whatnot, so I'm going to feed it images of what I've maybe hand drawn or whatever I've done, whether I'm a sculptor or whatever, and then I want to create this generative art. What's the technology that's actually taking the images of maybe I make statues and I give it 10 pictures of my statues, what's the technology that's actually generating it to make it look similar? And I think Drew wants to answer that.
It really doesn't matter what the technology is. It's any programming language can do it.
So we're losing time here. I did actually want to go into like this idea of RPFE generative. Like, maybe that's a good segue, but yeah, Artlink, like, everyone's heard of CryptoKitties here? It was probably one of the first ones, like 2017, I think, and also CryptoPunks, which was 2017 as well. And you know, I showed the how do you pronounce it? Malgals? You know, the Malgal, the original sort of generative ones. Anyway, it's by yeah, so it's by the same sort of studio. Anyway, you know, you can see there's a big market value there. Yeah, so this sort of created like a gold rush, and I remember like back in the day, it sort of did almost crash Ethereum because of the gas and everything. Yeah, so talking about the sort of algorithm of it, is it actually generative? And most of it is sort of defined as combinatorial creativity, where you're dealing with permutations and combinations. And it's very, very simple sort of combinatorial maths. Like you are literally adding. So it gets progressive.
So simple we messed it up.
Well, it gets progressively more complex the more like conditional statements you add to the algorithm. But or just sort of like a static flat kind of run, you would just do like so many attributes, and the next layer has sort of like this level of transparency. That's like a hat or whatever, this triangle has like a layer of transparency, the circle, and then you sort of eventually combine them all together, sort of thing. So that kind of deals with the scarcity and the value of it, right? Because rarity is kind of like this idea of arbitrary scarcity. Hang on, I'm jumping ahead. But there is a whole industry built around this, like scarcity ratings and rarity scores. I think we're getting a bit too sort of behind to sort of go into the details, but it's just sort of simple stats. It's like trade rarity ranking, which is like the rarest of all trades. There's average trade rarity, statistical rarity, and then sort of like just calculating the rarity score. So this is all at the moment just based on metadata, like just complete statistical, because everyone is just following this formula since sort of like day one, and we're all sort of doing it. So this is kind of like the interesting idea, is like, is it art or is it just collectibles? Because from the get-go, it is just a product. It is just this pure product that is being defined within sort of like these limitations of an industry that's sort of like set what it can and can't be. Some of the popular rarity score sites. I know everyone likes OpenSea, right? Everyone knows OpenSea. It's kind of like the main one. I personally like IC tools if you're actually looking for rarity, but there's a whole bunch of other ways. And so this sort of, I think, ties into the next, or one of the points that Ray was making was about how you protect against this with provenance, and because there are people out there, not just people, but like bots that are sort of built to sort of snipe and to scrape and to find any sort of like kind of discrepancy in the market to kind of.
Oh my god, that looks like a depth chart.
Alright, we can skip over this if you want. I was going to talk about Merkle trees, but I don't think anyone really wants to hear about it. And also like SHA-256. This is just sort of like the basic protections of, If you know crypto, you know what trees because it's all what it's based on. It's basically just a tree hash. It's like a hash of a hash of a hash. Yeah, so the provenance hash would just basically be like the hash of like all the metadata, and you provide that beforehand. So to provide proof that you actually have provenance, and then later on you reveal it. So that's the way you kind of like do the magic trick. It's like we haven't like altered the metadata, but you know it's been the same the whole time, and that's important because some of these, you know, the market cap of some of these are like literally like hundreds of millions of dollars. So if you do not have like sufficient proof that you have like gone in and altered it or like done some sort of manipulation on the data, then you're not able to sort of provide a secure product.
How does a beginner like me know if the metadata has been altered or tampered with in some sort of way?
So they will should give you a provenance hash, and you can find that by going to the contract on the Etherscan.
Beginner.
Thank you. I hire DLTx to figure it out for me?
No, it just shouldn't be hard. You just go to the contract.
Come on, people, just go to the contract.
Okay.
She just won't have access to it.
No, but you're saying if the metadata has been altered, so
Drew, tell them
like,
about the frozen icon on OpenSea.
does it
that
give me
says
some sort of
You
notification?
actually want to talk about first. No, so what are you asking for?
You said, you made a comment that, okay, if the metadata has been altered or whatever, okay, so how does a beginner know that it's been changed? You're saying go to
Well,
the
they don't.
contract?
They get
and
cheats,
then-
there's a lot of money.
Most of the platforms, the big ones, you'll have a tick, the verification tick.
Yeah,
So there's
so
some
That-
sort
that's
of way
just-
of verifying.
That's just Twitter verification.
Yeah, that just means they're famous. They can still bug you.
I'm just saying from a beginner, that's where you start, right? That would be the first thing to look for.
Yeah,
is
yeah,
the verification
yeah.
tick.
Reputation-wise, yeah.
yeah, so OpenSea is currently implementing some standards in terms of like freezing the metadata. But that still doesn't provide the.
Because I thought,
Hang on.
you know, but I thought anything that goes on the blockchain, it's supposed to be immutable and temporary.
Yeah, well, this is your first peek in the blockchain.
Yeah, but then you're saying, well, if the metadata has been, tampered with, so I'm kind of wondering more.
So,
Metadata's not on the
what's that, sorry?
How do you find the link to IPFS or Amazon or what have you?
If you go to OpenSea, and I hate to keep bringing up OpenSea because it's centralized and we're all supposed to get away from that. You can find the link there, but generally, say for instance, if you go to Artblocks, artblocks.io, I recommend it. Everyone just goes there, right? They will often have a link to the contract. I was going to do it. I was going to show you the contract and dig around in the contract, but I don't think I will because Drew gets terribly patient. And also the level is, the level is lower than we want to be talking about contracts. The reason, look, if you sell real art to a person, how do they know that your art isn't going to fall apart when they go home, right? You go into an art gallery here in the valley and you drop $10,000 on a painting. Some of it is off-chain. You're relying on the fact that this gallery's been here for decades, and they've got a good name to guardians, right? The name of the artist independently of the gallery, but you're just hoping that the canvas has been primed, the frame won't fall apart. But you, the seller, might want to say to the person, look, if you're going to hang this over a fire, put some glass in front of it. If it's a photograph, you would want to assure them that it was printed on archival paper. In the case of the NFT that's connected, like we said, to a metadata file, in turn connected to a JPEG, if those things are not capable of being changed, and that means they are on IPFS, the Interplanetary File System, then that's a good start. They cannot change that file, and they cannot change the image file, those two links. Unfortunately, speaking to Drew, they could change the link out of the contract to that, so you kind of have to look at the contract, right? Except for, and this is where I think the value comes from the art blocks and on-chain art, The image is in the contract. That's, I don't want to bore people and get too technical, but really if there's one reason why the Artblocks project is totally different to the other, 10,000 celebrity, 10,000 drops that are just garbage pictures of nothing with programmed randomness. This, it's gone, but the Chrome squiggle, that is, there's a chunk of code in the contract where it really shouldn't be. You won't see that in most of the contracts, right? Now, they are saying we are doing as much as we possibly can to preserve your art, and I think that's why they're getting top line prices. In the same way that anybody selling art anywhere who reassures the purchaser that this stuff will be around and valuable in decades to come. They're making two big assumptions and gambles. One, that the Ethereum blockchain will still be running in years to come, which is fair enough. They have to. The second is that JavaScript will be capable of being parsed. If it, for some strange reason, after 25 or 30 years, it stops being a thing, that's disappointing, but seriously, it's just gone from strength to strength. JavaScript, by the way, is the programming language that browsers understand. They only understand three things: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Right? It's been around for a long time. It's likely to endure, and they said if it doesn't, you can always hire someone to write parser. Right? So you own the DNA of the picture. You don't own a link to a flattened JPEG. Imagine buying a Picasso and you owned the DNA of that Picasso. So you could print it off again at different sizes, exactly the same picture. It is the same picture. It comes from the DNA, right? It is in the contract. And they pioneered, Autoglyphs pioneered it, but this guy from Squiggle Snowthrow, Luis Calderon, I think his name is, rounded up some of the best digital artists of the time and said, would you like to protect your art and put proper provenance where it belongs in the contract? So we were going to talk about FX hash, but we probably don't have time. Now, most people are put off because has anyone bought an NFT on OpenSea or on Ethereum? Who's bought an NFT? Did anyone find that it was quite a tortuous experience in terms of the gas prices that you have to pay? Yeah. But it's frustrating, right? It shouldn't. You should just be able to buy that thing, right? But there's a lot of people trying to do what you're trying to do, right? So there's other platforms. FX Hash is one that Stefan mentioned last meeting. You can go. Can you go to FX Hash?
For an NFT buying virgin here, how does one? And I'm sure there's other
on that
beginners
one.
here. How does one know, like, all the things that you were just
Are
saying?
you going live on that one?
How can I identify whether I'm buying something that actually is an art piece that's put onto the blockchain, or it's just, just a JPEG that's sitting on a website? Like, how can I, not knowing, identify what is a really good NFT project versus something that might not be around in a few years' time?
I think in the interest of time, we did cover some of that in the last meetup, so I can send you the slides for it around the metrics, just because we need to get through the slides.
Or you can just give us a 30-second response.
Well,
how would you know that you were buying a decent picture here in the valley?
I wouldn't. So I'm
So
asking.
you do a bit of research. If you're going to spend that much money, you'd ask someone who knows, right? That's what I do. I wouldn't just try to click around a few things. I'd say to someone, you've bought some stuff. You'd look at the blue tick. It's true. Look at the blue tick. You'd do some research. But ultimately, in a lot of these cases, it boils down to human trust. That thing can't be taken out of the equation. If you're going to spend a lot of money on an artwork, speak to someone who's done something similar, and they'll go, oh no, avoid, right?
Gotcha.
But there are technical ways, but the first thing would be like, ask someone who's done it. In the same way that if I was going to buy an expensive painting in the gallery, in the valley here, I probably just wouldn't rely on technical means to safeguard my $10,000. I might ask someone who knows about that. I know that's a fluffy, vague question, but at that stage, for that model,
Any real NFT project will have a proper Discord and have a
yeah,
second
exactly.
question.
Yeah, that's a great point. There should be a community around it, and you should get a sense by joining the Discord. And the founders. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The founders are the people, right? What have they done before? Are they showing their faces and not a bunch of apes? And are there tons of people in the Discord talking and willing to help you?
Oh, I just thought there might be like some sort of tech.
There's only so much they can do. They can just do the blue check, but they could just be a rich guy scamming people.
Yeah, due diligence is like sort of like a game now in this space. So like, I mean, it's sort of like, you know, focusing on fundamentals is, I think, more insightful, more meaningful, and more, you know, eventually just invest in what you love and what you find, you know, nice and resonates with you. Don't just ape in because. Anyway, did we want to talk about advanced models because we're running out of time? I kind of wanted to talk about GANs and sort of like neural nets and stuff like that, but it's kind of a bit off topic, but it kind of does have like a sort of a connection.
Give me the 60-second spiel.
Alright, so GANs are like a general reversible network. It's kind of like a neural network. I'm not sure if anyone has seen kind of like DALL-E recently. Maybe I'll just jump straight to that. Anyway, so there's a good, actually I'll bring it up on this one. There's a good site that can show, I think using Starling on, where is it? This board ape does not exist. But it's sort of like, so yeah, it sort of like brings up the idea of like what is this all for? So this is sort of like created like generatively through like again, I'm not sure what implementation they're using, but again it's basically long story short, it's you have a classifier, a generator, and you sort of like find the medium distribution in that, and then you bring out these amazing images. So there's like great applications of this, like Artlink, where you can sort of like deal with like the genomics or the history, the genes of the painting. And now recently, I'm not sure if anyone sort of, I'm super excited about this, so I really wanted to bring this up. But DALL-E 2 came out like a month ago. I think DALL-E 1 came out in like beginning January last year. But just yesterday or today actually, Google came out with Imagen, which is apparently like a percentage better or quite a lot better than DALL-E. So it's basically just sort of a large-scale language model that's been trained with to do sort of like this idea of prompt engineering, where you can sort of give it a prompt, like a language prompt, and it sort of understand. So you can see here that this is like a bowl of soup that is a portrait to another dimension as visual art, and I can bring it up on the side. Yeah, so a majestic oil painting of a raccoon queen wearing French. Is it going to show me?
Lingerie.
Yeah, so crazy. I'm looking curiously at cat. It's almost surreal how good it is, and the rate it's good, sort of thing.
So can I just get some clarity here?
Yeah.
So you can type in something that says an extremely angry bird and it will generate an extremely angry bird.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's been trained on like this huge data set, and it has sort of just this like intuition of what to sort of create. And this has like huge implications for artists and creatives.
When you type in
No, it creates the image completely. It completely generates it. So this is when we talk about generative models. It's kind of like the.
But that fast? Like you type it
It
in?
takes. Well, I have signed up for both playlists, and and I hear it's about 15 minutes, so there is still like a wait time.
These are just previews.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering if you type in, you know, like
Yeah.
angry cat, does it pop up as fast as that? 'Cause
No.
that's pretty.
No, this is just their website. So,
That's just their website, yeah.
I was gonna say,
but,
that's
like,
impressive.
It's strange to see the difference between DALL-E and Imogen. Like, DALL-E has dyslexia and just can't do like writing, but Imogen seems to like handle good. Anyway, so this is sort of like been happening really rapidly. It's been about so it's been about like 2 years since like the sort of the first real kind of conception of this idea. Anyway, so why I want to talk about that was because of sort of this idea of scarcity and infinite mutability, and what's the actual meaning of like an NFT, because most of like the collectibles are just based on this sort of artificial scarcity. And what's the meaning of it if you have like a model that can just create whatever you want, whenever you want, sort of thing, and it's like yours to own. And yeah, DALL-E 2, which is actually trained on GPT-2, GPT-3, sorry, no, 2, because it's OpenAI. Explicitly sort of states in terms that it's not allowed to be used for like non-commercial purposes, and I kind of found it funny that they actually said NFT, that was my spiel about generative virtual games or auto-coders. Did you want to?
Yeah, I'll finish what I was saying. So I'm going to demur a little bit from Drew here. I'm old-fashioned. To me, this is the guy in the band who bought a pedal for $300 and says, "Oh, check this out." These songs still are awful. Like, it's just digging around and good. I'm just saying that because for me, generative art is a line in a circle and doing something yourself. It's the basics, right? If you have an ounce of creativity in you, which I don't know, how many people here are artistic by nature, consider themselves who want to create stuff, right? Who use a computer to create, to express themselves. That it?
No, there was way more in the beginning.
Right, so you want to use computers to express yourself. Unfortunately, that means starting at the ground, right? That's like picking up a guitar and learning your do-re-mis, right? It just is. So you asked what are the tools of the trade. The tools of the trade are some sort of programming language. P5.js is the big one at the moment, and it's just JavaScript. And you'll download it, you'll get someone to help you if you're not particularly coding related, but that's fine. All artists rely on some sort of technological assistance. Nobody is saying you're less of an artist because you need a bit of help with that. And you'll start with a straight line, you'll start with a circle, you'll generate a ton of straight lines, you'll bend them a little bit, you'll make them more. And you can watch a lot of YouTube videos of this, and it's very quickly goes from just a regular grid whatsoever. Oh, look at that. That's quite interesting. It bends a bit. It's a flow field. You go to Tyler X Hobbs and you read this guy's essays. This is the best-selling artist on art blocks. And you get a naturalistic flow field. And that is the tool of the trade. I wish I had more time to show it to you. And that's what I've done. I've just started from scratch. I know that there are fantastic tools out there that can turn a cat into a fish. To me, that's kind of like most AI. That's just like you're just borrowing off Google. I'm just borrowing off Google every time I do that. Really, that's not interesting to me. It's fantastic that we look at that, but it's just I don't consider that artistic. I don't consider that expressive. I consider a straight line expressive. I consider the fact that you pick red, not blue, and you have just a blank screen, and you use a computer much like you'd use a paintbrush, oils, canvas, watercolors, anything to express yourself, right? If you want to do that, hit me or Stefan up, I suppose, or Drew, because we can help you. I know it's a little bit forbidding to people who aren't programmers, because you're going to have to either, as Ben Copeland said, come at this as an artist and learn programming, or come at this as a programmer and learn art. I think it's easier to come at it as a programmer, because anything's art. But your page is either working, your page is either crashing or it's not, right? And to write code, like we do all day, most of the time, most we get out of it is a form gets an email and says, yeah, that's an email. It's pretty boring. But if you're a generative artist and you do this, you get a beautiful pattern. And I can tell you that I've lost weekends and nights just doing this, just hitting over and over, just seeing the output of an algorithm to a beautiful picture that I had no idea what it would look like. So I recommend anyone who wants to express themselves with this new interesting art form to find out a little bit more about P5JS programming, get someone to help you, in exactly the same way that Bridget Riley doesn't sit there and draw all these lines on things. You get someone to do that for you, right? And Damien Hirst. They get people to do that. That's just a technological thing. Someone will have to do it. But if you've got the vision to do it, computers will do it, and then the next step is to put it on chain where people buy it, and it doesn't exist until someone clicks the button, and it's like a slot machine with a beautiful artwork coming out. And that's what's made this thing so interesting. That barely ever existed before, right? I think that to me that's very interesting. And Drew agrees.
I just want to I think technology has always been about augmenting, or creativity has always been about augmenting technology. Even paintbrushes are a form of technology. So, yeah.
That's an example of generative art, right?
Yeah. What's a generative collection?
I would define it as
Like they're not going and drawing every single one of those individually, right?
no, it's a generative algorithm of a collectible.
They drew all the stuff that you see.
Yeah.
They just didn't draw the 10,000 one by one.
Yeah, so
that's not generative art.
It's generative, but even they're not calling it art, so we should.
It goes back to your definition of generative. That's purely deterministic in terms of the exact statistical outcome of the rarities and stuff like that. Whereas generative more has a simplification of like some sort of form of entropy and randomness, and that is kind of closer to line with creativity. It's like what could happen, what can't happen, sort of thing. So
Different tool for the job.
yeah, it's a combinatorial sort of thing, I'd say.
So if there's a randomness to it, how do you preserve recreating the exact same thing here? So if you run the P5Js with an RMD random number walk, how do you preserve that rendered image is going to be for you to see sometime in the future?
That's a great question. That's really good. I struggle with this a lot. I would just keep hitting refresh, and occasionally I get some real banger, and I think that means good, right? That's what people say. Shouldn't really jump into these young people's words.
Maybe not elderly NFT holders.
I'm not elderly. I'm 24. Tell me.
I was just saying that we could create a new stream of pornography type of generative art here.
No, but I want to answer this man's question because it's very, very good. You have to give up on that. I have a page of stuff, right? And it is here's my code, which I was going to spare you. And here's basically what I do. This is my P5JS, and I run it. So it says sketch, and I go blah blah blah, set up, and then I go draw. See, we have a draw. And then, depending on whether a number turns out to be bigger than 50 or less than 50, I draw some colors, I draw some stars, I draw some boxes, I draw some dots, I make a border, I say true and I say, right? So in other words, a lot of the stuff that I get back is because I've generated a random number between 1 and 100, and I go, is it bigger than what I feel like a wave should be only on every 10% of my pictures? Is it bigger than 0.1? And I tried saving that, because I wanted, oh my god, that's great, I'd love to have that, and then run that algorithm again. And what happens is you just dick around with the algorithm so much that even when you save all the numbers, it's a different algorithm next time. And I just said, darn, it's so ephemeral, you just have to let go. But it's a great question because
It's the same as the Lorentz occurred in the sense that the rounding error, what's preserved.
The butterfly effect, the chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of. If I could trap those numbers, it would be precisely the same. But that would mean that I hadn't changed the program in the meantime. And generally when you're doing this, you go, oh, so many of my pictures, I'll leave it for 5 minutes, go and wash the dishes, and I'll come back and I'll get a folder full of stuff. And I go, you know what, they're all, it's just piled up in the left-hand corner or right-hand corner, it's too red, too blue, too dark. I'll change it a bit, change some of the stuff that's not the parameters. And then the previous bucket load of parameters I have are all null and void because they don't apply to the same program. And when you do that a few times, you understand how great this generative art is because they had to do that and give up at a certain stage. It's like they say about great artists, like, when do you stop painting? You just always stop painting. It's the hardest thing, just stop painting. Walk away from it. So they have to make sure that when someone presses that button and buys an art block for a lot of money, they get something that's aesthetically appealing because that's why they're famous. It's not a maths project, it's an art project. Art blocks, it looks nice. It harkens to the Jackson Pollocks and the Bridget Rileys and the Victor Mazzarellis and Jason Morgan.
Jason, oh yeah, sorry.
But it doesn't crash the app and it doesn't give people such resounding clangers. That's what I get. It's all black, it's nothing, it's really crap. But there has to be a disappointment zone where the really good ones stand out from the bad ones. So it's really quite difficult because it's very easy to just make something that looks fantastic and splashy and colourful all the time. But then, ironically, each individual one of them would have no value. So it's a tricky one. I'm arguing it's a totally different type of art. One where size matters. Thousands and thousands of pictures can be generated from these algorithms rather than one. Rather than artists who would say, oh, check out this one picture I've been working on for ages. I call it man's inhumanity to man. No, you should be calling it number 312 of 500. It's volume, it's just an algorithm. The algorithm is in charge. Was there something new?
No, only one question. I did want to go into the information theory of it and talk about complexity, which is sort of talk about algorithmic complexity, which is basically minimal string, the minimal computational. No one cares. Is there any more questions?
I have one quick question.
Yeah.
For Ray. As the artist, do you feel that it's the program, the algorithm that you generate is the real art?
Yeah.
Or is it the output?
I mean, you can copy Tyler Hobbs. You go to tylerxhobbs.com. He's the guy that did Fidenza, and he'll give you a pseudocode to make a flow field. And you can copy that and get it working. And lo and behold, you get a lovely spiral picture. Now, I'm not Picasso, so he owns that. But he copied that from someone else. My contribution to any artistic thing is the choice of, in my case, because I study photography, I sample pictures, put them in the background, and get the flow field to run over them, and you get strange pictures. And I treasure the juxtaposition of a meaningful part of the picture, i.e. someone's face, a bit of a texture from a building and so on. Because for me, personally, the just pure mathematical thing, it just doesn't cut it, but I can appreciate that it does for, But I'm a code monkey, I'm not an artist, and I do this up to the point where it looks good and it's easy to do. I've hit the point, I think, where I have to go back and strip away all the stuff that gives me, I might have an hour in the evening, I'm tired, I just want some stuff to look good. It's like when you play computer games. I don't go back and do that, I just want to move on with the game and save it and feel good. I don't want to go to bed agitated, right? But real artistry will come when I go back down, as he says, and study that flow field program and really work out what every one of the 8 parameters that he's giving you does. If they all have an effect, which one do you want to get? Do you want to get a curved flowing field? Do you want a short staccato pattern? So it's a great question. What was it again?
Here's a tax question. If I create a piece of art and then I sell it,
I'm so like
it's a no gain.
Great question.
No gain there. If
I don't want people here to get hung up on board apes and stuff like that. I want people to be expressive. We're in an art gallery. It is a fantastic opportunity at the moment. You just have to learn how to program in JavaScript. There you go. So I'm glad we saw that.
Sorry, the P5JS is an open source.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so the case your coding is really manipulating the libraries provided by that.
Yeah.
Is there a code control following standard practices so that if one of the modules update, it doesn't change the behaviour of the output?
You're just smashing it tonight, man.
Is this a beer conversation?
So
We'll let it 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes.
Something great. The P5JS evolves to actually wreck your art.
Yeah.
That was, he's like, can I answer this one, please?
I was just going to say, tell them about the GitHub Arctic thing, because P5JS is one of the programs that is actually stored, like all the seeds of the plants in the world up in the Arctic Circle. So they say we will allow a dependency that's not JavaScript. We will allow one Artbox, because we know that people need this. P5JS is in because it's stored in the GitHub Arctic program.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, unless you're, actually embedding the compiler in there and it's like the way to execute it, it's not really possible. But what I was going to say was that, ERC 998 sort of kind of gives that possibility of updating it. You can create a composable NFT and then just sort of upgrade it every time you want to change the LLC. But it implies that people are still allowed to do that. So, otherwise, we just need a seed bank.
So, any more questions?
No more dev questions.
Make a comment.
You got the higher quote, not me. You got the quote from the high.
Just that, I really appreciate your take on it, because you're the first person who's spoken to me about NFTs that's concentrated on the art. And you called me cynical earlier on, but there's been a lot of talk about investment and tax and value. And it's all about, can I do like a Bored Apes like another fairly derivative collection of cartoons by numbers? And to be honest, a lot of this is really new to me. I'm loving this. There's actually looks like art rather than a bit of a quick.
That picture there, so that's a collab. My brother is an artist, and he sent me some pictures on Twitter, and I just said, I'm gonna hit them with my algorithm. So I just ran that over and sent it back to him. So you can do collaborations and so on, right? That if you're wondering what that is. But yeah, I agree. Look, those profile picture collections are more like sub-currencies. There's 10,000 of them, that's the supply. A bunch of rich people will buy them. They're just sold to be, they're like hot potatoes. They're just sold to be passed on. The interesting thing is the degree to which artists are using the technology to do something new. No one is thinking that that's the case with the profile picture collections. And to credit the people themselves, they're not even saying that either. They're just saying, we're building a community. In fact, it's a very good way to build a community, or raise money instead of going to Kickstarter for a movie or something like that, right? The big problem is at the moment, this stuff is just sold out. But I bought one recently for about $400 because it's so popular that there's constantly new art blocks projects being minted, and they're not all just sold out, so there's a room to get into it. And I was going to show you FX Hash. It's a little bit geeky, and it's on the Tezos chain. Okay, so it's not on Ethereum. But the good news is you can get collecting NFTs for like $2 or $3. And it's win-win-win. I've looked at this. You support the artist. You find someone on Twitter who's doing a good job, and you buy something, and you get an NFT, as they call it, generative token, for a couple of dollars. I need to be realistic, not to be exploitive, but like they get 50% every time. That isn't necessarily the case with Ethereum. OpenSea has its own idea about what a royalty is, and you can write your own contract and tell them what a royalty is. They go, no, you're in our shop now, right? So FX Hash is on the Tezos blockchain. I advise everyone, we'll probably put it in the show notes and so on, because it's a good way for people to get their toes wet in this, because otherwise I think the prices and the gas puts people off.
So the question is, do you think like the base thing and the other side and all that versus art to it?
It's not There's certainly art insofar as it's well done, it's expressive, and it appeals to people and it's of cultural merit. But it's not self-consciously art, it's not trying to be appealing aesthetically without any further utility. You'll never see a roadmap mentioned on ethics actually. What's a roadmap? They just all talk about a roadmap. That's just a promise. They bang on that roadmap. Oh great, you're gonna do something in the future. Well, so they just say if you like to look at this stuff and it self-consciously refers back to some paintings in the past, then you should buy it and support an artist. That's a whole different question, and that's a great question. And we'll probably do a metaverse thing on some night because it's entirely different to this. Metaverse is all about utility. You take these things and you do something with it in a virtual world. You can't do anything with these. And in the same way that you can't do anything with a beautiful painting that you buy in a gallery down the road. You can't really, no one's saying you can do anything. So I think they're different things. I think they're different things.
So then art that exists in the metaverse, and that's a whole other ballgame as well.
Well, I don't know what that art is.
Well, for example, you could have something from any one of the sites you mentioned featuring another site metaverse.
Oh, you mean just if you walk in the metaverse and you see a board ape?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
any art, you could put any art in the metaverse.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the next.
Yeah, I've seen some of those. You can go to the centre, there's a gallery and someone will show their...
That's giving utility to an art form.
Maybe that's Artlink.
Yeah, I mean, that's just an art block hanging in the metaverse. It hasn't changed its...
But I mean, a lot of the argument, it's not, as well as sort of just this definition of art, and a lot of what you're sort of saying is just the sort of institutional backing, like how can you define it as art, is it art? And I think through history, it sort of has been defined through sort of religious sort of lens. And NFTs really do have this sort of democratic kind of leveling kind of thing, but that also kind of reduces the quality sometimes. So this is why we're in an interesting sort of period where quality and the merit and the cultural value of it is kind of being defined as it goes along. And it'll be interesting, like 5 years from now, to sort of like see what people actually sort of thought of it. You know, it's just too early to kind of understand the cultural implications.
Write it down in your journal today, what you think, and then let's come back 5 years from now.
Yeah.
Just a comment, a couple of comments were made about having to install P5 and learning all of JavaScript, and I worry that you may have scared some people off from trying to mix creativity with code, and you can open a browser-based development environment for P5.js, and you can watch a YouTube channel called Coding Train. It'll teach you step by step.
Yeah, with very data sheet.
And in about 4 hours, you'll be doing generative art with no prior coding experience. So
Yeah, the coding train is just like an absolute, just like train, I suppose, just this mammoth of.
But that's great, right? You could go down to Ecosy, buy a canvas, buy some paint, buy some paper, which is in 4 hours.
But
You've got more off going. You know, it's great. That's good. And then after that, the market will decide whether you've got something to say or not. But you want to get in early. But yeah.
I'm just saying that people in the room might have been scared off by the idea of having to learn more JavaScript. So there is really simple ways of having a go, and you can get quite addicted to it pretty quickly. So, so do have a go.
What was that website?
Coding train.
Coding
Train on YouTube.
Coding train is just like.
Hey, Richard, where's Richard? Richard wants to learn how to code.
Dan sorry.
There you go.
Coding Train. All right, well, we're getting close. Well, we're over time, so we're going to have to try and wrap it up so we can head over to the pub. But, yeah.
She said we can hang out and have a little bit
Yeah.
more.
Thank you very much to both Ray and Drew. Really appreciate it. And yeah, if there's one takeaway I can take from tonight is the fact that, generative art is randomness in that you don't know what's going to come out the other end. And in the trap art world, you will have rejects where, the artist will retain creative control over what he will release to the public. Whereas with generative art, everyone gets to take part of the reject. So the concept of reject is a bit of a rejection of art in itself. So that's the beauty of generative art, is that it is what it is you get. And
There's no refund button?
No. Not even for gas. Sorry. So yeah, thanks again everyone, really appreciate it. And yeah, as you can see, there's a lot to talk about, either GANs or metaverse art. So yeah, we're going to be covering a lot more of these topics in subsequent meetups. And yeah, we'd love to have the drone break back again. So yeah, thanks again and see you at the people for groups.